The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What's happening? Benton here. Shout out to Denise Winterbottom. I knew that from memory. Something about when I was about to say Winterbottom. There was a bit of a hiccup there in the old brain. What's up, Denise? Always good to see Miss Denise around. Yesterday was the official. It was official yesterday. Benton became 50 years old. Um, Not a big deal from my perspective. Uh, I did nothing differently other than had a phone conversation with my mom. I suspected I would be that she would text me. Um, I almost sent a shitty message actually, and then thought better of it. And she was wishing me happy birthday. Must have been improperly identified when I was typing up the shitty message. Took a look at it. What I am can't send this message. What is this? And I just said thanks. And then later, after taking care of the morning chores, I said, yeah, I might as well give a gift on my birthday, right? And received two gifts in the form of donations or, well, money. So thank you all for that. Much appreciated. Um, Certainly not necessary, but it always feel kind of good to use a Cash App to see the little dollar sign show up and it not be them trying to rope me into some sort of bullshit. You can borrow up to this amount and pay it back, no interest or whatever scam is going on in Scam Nation, scam or scams. Oh, Denise is in Maryland visiting family. Peace and respect. Joe Moore says peace and respect. Benton in chat. Indeed, sir. Right back at you. Thank you, Denise. Happy birthday to me. Yeah, I did way less wandering around and telling people it was my birthday. It's a sort of a staple of the Leo repertoire is to just tell random people that it's your birthday. Um, so yeah, a little close to DC there, Denise. That's in the news, right? So thank you for bringing up Maryland. Um, and there's a dystopic content coming out of Baltimore, of course. Maryland apparently considered the South in some ways, although it's not entirely clear. Virginia probably would be the first state in that area that, although Kentucky as well, it gets a little murky with respect to what is the South. And then there's the old Mason-Dixon line, the southern border of Pennsylvania, right? And as I've talked about before on here, having conversations with people from India when I was truck driving, trying to explain, or maybe somebody from Romania who's never really spent any time in the U.S. or outside of Romania. Was it Romania? I might be misremembering. The Balkans, somewhere in the Balkans. I don't know. I'm not a geography expert. Please understand. And trying to explain the significance of the Mason-Dixon line when I was not allowing them to send me to the Northeast. And they're like, well, what about Ohio? I was like, yeah, that doesn't count. That's not, that's technically the Midwest. That's not the Northeast. Depends on the direction one is traveling, I suppose. The confusion around there. Exactly. This is what I mean, Denise. Yeah, Wikipedia might say, if I Google and say, is Maryland in the South? It gives some answers, but that was what I suspected, and I've also spent some time there, not a lot, but spent some time in Maryland, and yeah, that's what I suspected. They don't consider themselves Southern, but a bit of the funky accent that's not really a Northeastern accent. That's also a factor. But yes, yes, good stuff. Yes, that's right. The Southern, the straight line. I think the southern border, the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania. Exactly. There you go. And I'll discontinue reading the chat for now because of my propensity to distract myself. Made a few notes. I was listening. I like a lot of this lolcow content, and Aaron Imholt from Steel Toe Morning Show was being made sport of uh, on Who Are These Podcasts, aka WATP. And just in passing, I heard Aaron say, what did he say? I wrote it down. You're going to have to lock up the homeless. So, as America can't decide if it's a bunch of woke, depraved sexual degenerates on Front Street, you know, vacillating between the pandemic and being a bunch of woke, politically correct, you know, types, to now America can't decide if it's that or if it's, you know, so-called right-wing fascist authoritarian. And it's always been authoritarian, certainly. America's never not been authoritarian, lest we forget. It's always ever present. The system certainly maintains itself at the level of authoritarianism, and just reading some of these news articles, Trump is bringing in a police state, and of course, again, it's the government, but the mind control implies that, well, then it's not a police state, but it's in the process of becoming a police state, and Trump is doing that. So just like continuously, and in fact, Aaron Imholt, after talking about you're going to have to lock up the homeless, and then it's of course right to the cliche of, well, Reagan closed the state hospitals. It's like, no, the government decided, probably most likely because of globalization back then, that uh, and these things being publicized around the horrors and abuses going on within the state hospitals. And lest we forget, a very popular movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was set in one of those state hospitals. Nurse Ratchet, anyone? That's Reagan's state hospitals, right? So that nightmare of what that purportedly became led to the government, you know, getting rid of the concept of these asylums and all of these things, at the behest of the federal government, presumably. Um, and then in the YouTube comments, I see, there's homeless content, there's mentally ill people, running around. The title of the stream, Homeless Man's Antics. It's just something I heard listening to content. I heard somebody a reference to homeless man's antics. I said, that sounds good. Wrote that down. Um, and then seeing, in the pandemic, people adjusting to the mask wearing and all of these things, and then going along to get along, and I got kids and all of that, as the answer to tyranny. And old Benton got fooled. Benton got tricked. Benton got tricked into believing that these folks who are always going to go into the right wing authoritarian MAGA republicanism, strong leader, martial law, authoritarianism, clean up the streets, tough on crime. And a lot of these things are fine. But every aspect just mentions needs to be studied and investigated and discussed and discoursed upon in order to have a proper society, which America has never had a proper society. And they say, what do you mean? Well, yeah, you can go back and examine, the Ozzie and the Harriet, the post-war period, any time in American history, that's fine. And what I'm asserting is that if that was a proper society, it would have not been capable of degenerating and devolving into the current hell in America. Therefore, past versions of American society could not possibly have represented proper society. And whatever comes out of this Trump stuff, you got to lock up the homeless. Now there's, one of the, if not perhaps the most historically influential so-called truth community channel did a live stream yesterday. And this is not to be critical of the content creator who I have had, you know, what I would assume to be an ongoing relationship with. The channel Chalk Body Outline, and that in fact was my Benton here's entree into the so-called truth community. And I'm always grateful for old CBO there putting me on, as they call it. In a way, I was already on, I was already down, but at least in the context of the so-called truth community. And so he did a stream, and again, YouTube is a clickbait platform. So without actually watching the stream, I can't draw too many conclusions. But the title is Trump's martial law, in quotes, is good. Prove me wrong. And you know, people who are who they are, right? And many folks are quite in touch with the parts of themselves that respond favorably to the government cracking down on various groups, um, the homeless being one of those groups. And old Benton here has been homeless since about 2012, and no fear of a crackdown for me. And in fact, you know visiting the West Coast years ago, um, in fact that's where the journey began, or that was the first destination when all of this began, the traveling around, the homelessness, um, in Santa Cruz and then in San Francisco. LA is more of a recent phenomenon for me, but last couple of years, uh, and seeing that in some ways, and then Portland, big Portland was really the first place I went where it was like, wow, they've just let the homeless take over, portions of downtown. Um, and I never really sought out the Tenderloin in San Francisco. That was more of just a known quantity, right? It just sort of is what it is. If a person goes there, they kind of know what they're getting into. Same thing with Skid Row, LA, I would assume, which I traveled through at a certain point, but did not stop. Walk through it at like 4 a.m. on foot. In fact, it was so dystopic and sinister, and I was on my way to from the Greyhound station to a bus stop to go up to Ventura and then to Santa Barbara on connecting buses, that I walked repeating out loud, "Indomitable volatile, loose cannon, indomitable volatile, loose cannon." Because as a white boy, right, which I don't really identify that way, but coming across as a white boy who would obviously, just by my physical appearance, not be of the Skid Row, LA area, felt like I needed to verbally let these people know what was coming through the area, right? Just like I saw a video where this guy supposedly swam the entirety of the Amazon in is it the Amazon River? He swam some river in the Amazon, and people were like, well, what about these fish and these bigger predatory fish? And he was like, they're going to accept me as one of them. They're just going to see me as one of the fish. And there was like, I don't know, man. Those fish eat each other. But then at a certain point, he was just so used to the environment, that the other, the other creatures that are used to that environment swimming down the river or whatever, up the river, that is sort of an effect, right? Just kind of let them know, yeah, I'm not from here, but I ain't stopping, and there's really no reason to have an interaction. And so, being from the South, and being again, like half a hippie, a little, more left leaning. And again, I don't like that. See, I don't even like to describe myself that way. Uh, but the old left right paradigm, my understanding was that the Alex Jones show had broken and disabused everybody of the notion of, fitting their consciousness and their own identity into a left right paradigm, which, I, for some insane reason, believed that that's what I was entering into with the so-called truth community, was that this was people who had been supposedly down all the rabbit holes. They had watched all the documentaries, the Alex Jones type documentaries, the, Loose Change and Zeitgeist and all of this stuff, all your 9/11 stuff. And these were people who had fully internalized, um, the folly of the left right paradigm. Oh no, it turns out, seemingly, again, not having watched the stream from last night, unable to, because when I clicked on a random part of the stream, it was just, there's mainstream news on the TV. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to watch, uh, you know, I'm not going to watch somebody watch the mainstream. It's just, it doesn't matter which network. It's not going to happen. Um, I can't say that I'm baffled. And it's not disappointment. It's Benton just, blame the fake undiagnosed autism, the neurodivergence, whatever. Just there's a naivete and a gullibility, which, or we've had people describe it as like a lack of guile in a way, which is strange because there is quite a bit of strategery, but and it is probably at the level of social interaction. But the fact that I spent so much time with these people and could not see them for what they are or what they were going to become, and it's fine. Like, it's not a black mark. It's not a, because remember, in the context of the left right paradigm, that would have to be the enemy, right? Or I would have to join them in, whatever they've got going on, possibly, at least implying support for Trump's so-called martial law. And then, that is the audience, right? Is that not the bulk of the audience? And then looking back on my own, live streams, daily live streams with, I don't know, averaging around 60 live viewers, so peaking out, around 85 usually every day for months on end. Um, and not to brag about the size of the streams, and being able to perform on stream in ways where, I was able to introduce, you know, new ideas to people who, at some deep in their soul, and that's probably not the right term, but deep in their core identity, within Moloch's machine here, in the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, and again, cursing their own blessing. And this is not for me to, it's not because of the right wing stuff. You know, it's to identify with this, and this used to be me, so this is not to insult anybody, to identify with the validity and the authority of this world, so much so that the individual actually defines who they are as a person in relation to this world of death and these games of lies, which is a violation, and uh, to curse one's blessing. But these concepts, strictly speaking, from Benton's perspective, well, that only applies to Benton, within Benton's energy sphere. That doesn't then become a mechanism to apply to other, you know, corporatized units in the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. So what I'm seeing with other content creators and other discoursers, to some extent, is it's sort of, it's again, it's the internalization versus the externalization, where let's have a club and a group and a clique or a clique, and then that becomes ideology. See, so having recognized Benton, having recognized the folly and the limitations of any ideology, whether it's so-called left or so-called right, the folly of adherence to any ideology whatsoever. And what I would say is, this is where if I was asked, right, I would caution people to say, listen, it's possible to be in favor of the cleanup of the streets, because I didn't finish my own story, and I'll go back to that. My apologies. But it's okay to be in favor of the cleanup of the streets, because I'm also in favor of that. Benton's also in favor of that. But Benton is not going to then fully align whatsoever with now. Okay, that's possible outside of a left-right paradigm. And this does show how strong the delusion is and how strong people's need to feel accepted and to feel loved and to feel like they're a member of a community. And for whatever reason, that was broken within Benton very early on, probably the Jehovah's Witness stuff, but it was a benefit in a way. It was beneficial in a way to, Benton's path of progress. And then we get into, fate or destiny as well. Probably most likely this is the way things were supposed to go in Benton's life, which is not even, see, and so even using the term life, right, um, within the context of the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions and a world of death, to refer to this experience or these collections of experiences as this life, that's not even correct, right? It's actually this death. But in inverted world, of course, the mind control built into the delusory realm has your performer here, your broadcaster, um, in the context of the performance, using the term life, this life, it's really this death. If the starting point is the birth, and that's supposedly the beginning of this life, and then the end point is the death and the end of this part of whatever experience is, well, would that not cross over at some point to being closer to death than closer to life, right? And then my own, metaphysical arguments around, I'm now seeing the realm itself as dead, but animated via creative force. The highest, the supreme authority, the highest, power and force of love and creation, or also known as what I am. One with an indivisible force, thus necessitating the this realm existing as delusion, and provably, in my view, via waking dream surrealistic unreality being baked into the cake. So back to the cleanup of the streets, being from a certain cultural context, and this is what I mean by transcendence of the limitations. So, I also was born into what represented a limitation of viewing society in certain types of ways around rule following, right? Do the right thing, American nationalism. I was also raised up this way, integrity, certain principles, the strength of the country, the strength of the local community, all of these things. So I was also fully indoctrinated with these ideas, but in a different way, because of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Benton was always standing apart from that. See, so maybe Benton was given the gift, and maybe that was because of John 15:16. I did not choose Christ, Christ chose me. And there seems to be some implication, although it's not outright stated in the Bible. Maybe it is somewhere and I haven't found it recently. But it seems to also imply that not everyone is chosen, or again, with the idea of free will, perhaps they're free to not go along. But however, when I look back at earlier stages of my life, it seems like I was always on this path at the level of destiny, something preordained or predestined, but I was unaware of it. So seemingly, so maybe, sort of, having point counterpoint within my own self at the concept of free will, or is it also, is it possibly more fate and destiny? Of course, it's both things, most likely. Um, it sounds mutually exclusive, but that's not necessarily the case. Um, so yeah, I'm not opposed to the cleanup of the streets, and seeing with my own eyes as a homeless person, right? Um, over a period of many years, watching the homeless being allowed to take over the streets, and wasn't for it, right? And is anybody for it? That's the question. And why were the homeless people allowed to hold sway over the streets of the West Coast for so long? And then you get into, leftist communist radicals, you get into Antifa, you get into BLM. So what I would say about the idea of the right wing or the MAGA types is, at some point, in looking at the CBO comments, one of the comments was something about, we'll just wait till the whites are in the streets with guns or whatever, or take the whites with guns take over the streets or something, they said. And it's like, um, Antifa and some of these groups are active at a street level pretty much, you know, year round, year in, year, like it's a thing, right? It really is. But what people seem to believe the right wing is going to do, or the MAGA, it's not a thing, you know? So at what point does the rubber meet the road? Now, I have my own opinions about that, but so you see the cognitive dissonance and just psychological schisms of what I see on the right, so called. And again, not a huge fan, but at this point, I guess there's just really no other way to refer to what's happening, in the zeitgeist. At some point, the lack of organization, right? The lack of these things, you know, um, when does that actually occur? And I'm not calling for it. I'm saying, are these things that exist merely in the imagination? As much as people probably believe that they're organized, oh, they've organized themselves online, right? Well, wouldn't that be to inform on one's own activities, you know? Because it's all on computers and phones, meaning it's all given directly to the government, right? And presumably Antifa and left-wing communist radicals are more the types to understand how to use the technology while minimizing the government's ability to surveil them, although certainly still being surveilled and certainly infiltrated by government agents and the whole thing, right? But the right wing, and this goes back to Mark Passio's idea of these people don't want to fix the system. And I'm not talking about chalk body outline. I mean the people who become enamored with these ideas, right? Because, you know, when building these camps, that was the big fear in COVID, right? The pandemic was. So this is where I was getting along with, um, this is the basis we bonded, with some of these people in the so-called truth community, especially other content creators, around these ideas of, you know, the government's going to build camps, and then if I don't want to take an injection, next thing you know, am I going to end up in a camp, right? And this was the great fear, and Benton was, in a fear space for an extended period of time, and then, the drinking and the fucking, the physical challenges of 4 years of physical challenges and all of this, and truck driving, and while being very, very ill, and just the whole, this whole gamut, running this gauntlet. And, now the camps are apparently being built, but they're being built for the brown folks, right? And then racial profiling, the government seeking to make it legal to racially profile, and based on, how the person appears, what language they speak, and what they're doing for work, right? And is this in a vacuum? Is this right or wrong from the context of being an American? Well, at the level of neurodivergent, fake undiagnosed autism, you know, indoctrination, and maybe being gullible enough to have attempted to accept America as it attempts to put itself forward under notions of freedom, right? Well, America is about a strong authoritarian government that, if it needs to for its own purposes, will put whoever it chooses to in a camp, right? In a detention facility, which is something Benton here no longer fears. The only way out is through, no longer concerned with that. Um, so now Benton see, and apologies for all the third person, but I'm trying to learn not to say I am and then something negative sounding, because then that ends up referring the I am, referring to the larger force, the supreme authority, the power of love and creation and all of these things. The capital I, capital space, capital A, capital M, right? And then the you know the challenges of the language itself, certainly, the English language. So watching all of these things occur, and um, now fully accepting that, so as the government is rounding up people who are not citizens, well, of course, it's also rounding up some of the people who are citizens, and yeah, that's going to happen anytime a wide net is cast. But so the fact is, in America in 2025, most of the people who live here, or especially the ones who are from here, but either way, the majority of the populace is in, pardon me, is in favor of rounding up Americans, right? It's completely fine. So what Benton here, really had no choice but to accept for his own purposes during the pandemic was that, oh, in fact, the majority of America is in favor of social distancing, masking, right? Um, Maybe not the jabs as a requirement, but at minimum, just preventative, what are seen as cautious measures. That there's more Americans who are in favor of all of that than are against it. So the same thing with the tyranny, the camps, the martial law. It's beginning to appear, and sort of, this is kind of the lie of the left right paradigm, is that they say, well, it's half the country believes one way and it's half believes the other way. No, it's not. It's actually not, as far as left versus right, Republican versus Democrat. It's like a third, and then there's a third who are more independent, who can be swayed either way. And that's probably not the actual numbers, but that's close enough for the purposes of the discussion. So what Benton is highlighting is, it's the lack of independent thinking and the lack of open mindedness with respect to these issues. And there was a time in news, you know, this is gone. This is a bygone thing now, but there was a time when it looked like, at a corporate level and with news, there was going to be some version of kind of forcing opposing viewpoints. Does anybody remember this? So that if somebody like Chalk Body Outline, you know, was following the news format, and they are in a way, right? It's become mainstream news to have some version of whatever Steven Crowder does, and whatever a lot of these people do, Nick Fuentes or whoever it is, you know, Jimmy Dore, whoever these people are. Well, that's CBO is doing a version of that now, which is completely fine. It's not a criticism. Um, And apologies to people who are unaware of a lot of this inside baseball truther community talk. My apologies, but at a certain point, it's apropos, it's pertaining, and it must be covered by yours truly. So in an open-minded discourse where people want to weigh in and people want to have their say, and I'm not even saying that's valid. necessarily, because it's entertainment. It's not going to amount to a hill of beans. It doesn't represent problem solving, and that's another problem with the mind control, is that people going to these channels, and again, not saying not to go there, but people go to these various places on the internet and take in certain type of interactive content. They get to comment, they get to live chat, put their 2 cents in, and in my view, it can be harmful in a way, because now they feel like they've done something to actually address societal problems. Meanwhile, all existing social problems that are not directly connected to the advance of technology have been fully present in society since at least 1965. That's 65 years. So there's no reconciliation of the reality that whatever's going on, that the government is putting forth and saying, well, this is what's happening and this is the direction things are going. It's not going to fix any of the social problems based on the pattern that's already emerged. So, it can be helpful to have a person, who's part of the stream, who's will point this out. So when the people are sort of frothing at the mouth and getting, really into a frenzy around just loving the crackdowns and loving the martial law, and it's fine that people have something within them that responds to that, but when the person is closed-minded, and when there's not a thoughtful, intelligent um, discourse from a more open-minded perspective, because certainly the discourse from Mr. CBO is thoughtful and well reasoned, and there certainly is a case to be made for cracking down on criminals, on people pitching tents on sidewalks, injecting drugs, injecting IV drug users, right? Let's call these things what they are. And so, as Benton's on the left coast, I call it what it is. Now I understand to work in some of the more lefty sounding phrasing, the politically correct phrasing, and that's sort of that's a coding or a clue to the people who might be hearing me that, well, yeah, he's just so that they don't mistake me for MAGA, right? And again, it's also in a recognition of open-mindedness. Um, but what happens is, you have, because it's, and I don't like the term echo chamber, but because it's a group of people who are able to remain at a certain level of closed-mindedness because they're with their peers, right? And what do people do on the left and the right when it's time to group together and talk about serious issues, especially when it comes to problem solving, right? And if it's the government involved with problem solving, and people kind of aligning themselves with an administration and administration, and sort of rah cheering it on, well, simultaneously, the seemingly opposing political party is mad and frothing at the mouth because they're against it. you know well, we lose all of that nuance and all of that gray area, and who or what is served by the losing of the gray area and the nuance? Well, that serves the corporate system, that serves Benito Mussolini's concept of the state, that serves the authoritarian power structure, and it also Moloch's machine, and it does this by 0 and a 1, right? We're going to make you know these little addressable corporate units that can serve businesses, banks, corporations, and it's okay from the perspective of the machine if, well, as long as they're behaving predictably in ways that either serves left or serves right, then Moloch's machine says that's fine because I know what to do with them, as long as I can clearly identify them. And then they clearly identify themselves through what they do on their phones, what they do on their computers, who their peer group is, right? This is all mechanisms for the system of things, right, to address individuals, as a group, right? Uh, and so the losing of the nuance, the losing of the open-mindedness, who or what benefits? I would assert that it's that further consolidates the power of an already, way too powerful government. Now that's got to be in a context. What is the context of the way too powerful government? The context is the idea that America would be representative potentially of proper society, and that people would be able to, just do basic, um, a basic level of employment, right? When we talk about the masses, there needs to be a least common denominator of get a full-time job, right? Have a source of income, and then uh, be warehoused in a building somewhere, or in a suburban neighborhood, an apartment complex, whatever that is, but to always have the money if the person budgets their money correctly. Because, you know, people talk about the 80s and the 90s and certain times when you could just get a job and pay your rent. Well, that was the case, but there was still tons of people that had trouble paying their bills because a lack of discipline around their spending. That's always going to be a factor. Um, but nowadays, it's simply, it's nearly impossible to just work a 40-hour job as just a regular old common person. But it's not necessarily impossible across the board. It's changed, right? It's changed into something different. So, but I'm saying that's been the notion historically, is that more or less everybody who's willing and able to show up and put in a day's work on some level is entitled to a place to live, basic utilities, transportation, whether that's a bus, city bus, or walking, or, you know, able to walk, right? Meaning not just a road with ditches on both sides and no sidewalk, you know, and no shoulder, a place to walk to work, physically able to get there, or their own car. Um, this is not really a thing anymore, um, for many folks. Okay, and it's on purpose, it's by design. Of course it is. But but that's the framing, is a lot of the problem solving, and the framing is around, people who want to just be left alone, live their lives and be left alone, right? But while simultaneously supporting and, you know, uh, in some ways calling for this authoritarian crackdown, and what are the effects of that? And a lot of that is selfishness. It really is. And I've got my own thoughts about the concept of selfishness, but as long as me and mine are taken care of at an every man for himself level, then as long as the authoritarian, evil, fraudulent con artist government, well, as long as it's going to behave that way anyway. And sort of some of this is to just sort of, it's having acquiesced and given up to the reality that the government is going to be way too powerful. It's going to have way too much, ability to run roughshod over the populace. And it's going to do all of these things anyway. So it's to not oppose the power structure, right? But to say, okay, to see a possible advantage of, oh, well, there's a period of time when maybe the system is going to allow groups of people with certain ideas to have a greater part in seemingly determining what's happening, and then benefiting as a result temporarily via the wicked system, right? And then people seemingly completely fine going along with that, as long as it's their groups that are seemingly benefiting, while simultaneously believing themselves to be followers of the teachings of Christ. See, both of those are not, it's mutually exclusive. It's, they can either follow the teachings of Christ, or they can do what I just described. They can't do both, but they're going to seek to do both. Or more correctly, they're going to, or less incorrectly, they're going to, actually more correctly, they're going to seek to pass themselves off as the real thing, as followers of Christ, when what their actions are doing they don't represent the followers of Christ at the level of what they're doing. And again, they say, well, you can't judge, you're not the judge. I absolutely can judge. Judge means to form an opinion on. Absolutely, I can. And when people say, well, you can't judge, what they mean is it's not your place to condemn them. Well, yeah, you're right. And good, lucky for them, it's not, you know. And really, I don't even mean that. But um, so everything being described here is a morass, right? It's a morass, mired in a morass. Uh, and who or what is going to, and who has the luxury, right? Who has, I've hard worked myself into the luxury of getting to think about these things for hour after hour after hour every motherfucking day for years, folks. And if I go back to employment, I'll still be, surprise, surprise, it will still allow me while performing as an employee of a truck driving company, long haul truck driving. I'll still be spending hour after hour after hour thinking about these things. And in my world, that's a requirement, to really have any chance of parsing all of this out, and to, especially if one is willing to put themselves into society in a way where now, out of earning a living, raising children, and just the necessities of living day to day, they have to depend on a community in some way. Like they have to, right? And not that Benton, everybody's dependent within this, via the experience day to day within this vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions. What I would say is, when has the idea been examined of that because of the nature of the experience within delusion, that Benton at an individual level is then thereby somehow obligated to perform in certain ways within society at a level of obligation that then gets connected to a morality. See, and that's the thing with the hard work and the pull yourself up by your external bootstraps and all of these things, is that it becomes a moral imperative, but it's a moral imperative that's never attached to legal persons known as corporations. So the corporation is free to behave in very immoral ways, lacking integrity and principles, at the expense of the lowest of the low in society. So what you have is the strongest entities. Some of the strongest entities are corporations, and they're allowed to have free shots to bully and to harass and to make the lives of the people at the bottom even more miserable than they otherwise would be. Right. And that's America. And, back to the Passio ideas of, see, the people who I'm talking about, they don't want to fix that. And so the followers of Christ would presumably would have to rise again. They would need to internally bootstrap, be taught by the Holy Ghost, the Comforter, John 14:26, I believe. This transformative process would happen within the followers of Christ, and the Bible saying, you didn't choose me, I chose you. What I'm saying is these are not the followers of Christ's teachings, and that's okay. That's what I'm saying. But it's being claimed, which is also okay. What I'm doing is observing and reporting. And what I mean by okay is there's no reason for me to now the loop into problem solving and say, well, something has to be done. No, it doesn't. They're free to do that, as I'm free to notice it and report on it, which is what I'm doing here. And so it's helpful to have a person around who's not, especially at this stage of development, who's not going to get angry about it, who's not going to shout people down, but who's also not going to spend his energy just sitting there on a panel waiting for these people to figure out, oh, this is the part of the conversation that Benton probably has some sort of open-minded, thoughtful thing to add that hasn't been considered fully, and then the conversation and the discourse can progress, right? Except the internet and these, MK Ultra systems, and we've had other content creators cover, you know, all of this much more intelligently than I would be able to. In that context, the system and the technology is already set up to preclude that from happening. So you can't have a Benton around. Now, if Benton's willing to go in there and fight, and put the energy into shouting people down and, hey, man, shut the fuck up long enough for me to talk, and then to persist through, constant interruptions, that's not on the table anymore. So until they do better within themselves and invite somebody on, and then in a spirit of good faith and goodwill, actually have an ardent desire to hear, you know, someone who's going to thoughtfully and open-mindedly give these little critiques and tweaks to these people's own thought process, but not in a emotional appeal to the fickle feelings of the peanut gallery. Not in a I got a little angry there, just a slight flash of anger. Give me a second to fix it with the breathing. We've already back to proper identification, but hang on, give me a second. There was some other there was some stagnated energy that I feel is now escaping. Same thing happened yesterday after I composed that shitty message to Mom, but never sent it, thankfully. Although I would have if there'd been any reason to. Where are we at here? Shout out to the chat. There's a whole bunch of comments, so let me address the comments, so in case somebody's flooding the chat. Am I going to have to turn slow mode on? Am I going to look down and see one name? Okay, good. Well, it's more complicated. Anyway, let me not just start speaking to the chat directly. I just want to monitor what's going on. What's up above the trees? Yes, I've been in the Thorpe's chat before. Correct. At Thorpe TV is the channel they're referring to there. Yes, sir, you do. Above the trees. Yeah, there's something about this icon that really draws people's attention. He says, he says, I'm not sure, but your name and pick from MBK movie triggers the mind. Yeah, that's a very powerful icon, certainly. So good to see you. I do read chat from time to time. I used to actually do a lot of what I call crowd work. And I know there's only 9 folks in here, but there have been times when I was doing daily streams up to, pretty close to 12 hours at times, but every single day for months on end. And the audience, there would hardly ever be less than like 30 people at any given point, and, as much as 85 people. Not to flex on old above the trees, but when I'm really getting into these, and a lot of what I'm talking about these days is spiritual discourses. So I allow myself to get too distracted by the comments, and I'm so visual that I just lack the ability to have the comments on the screen and then to do my thing and then not get distracted by the chat. So yeah. Well, that's the thing, above the trees. See, the way you ramble endlessly, um, it's not exactly that, sir, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt on that one. See, that's the thing. And see, I can't be fit into categories. So let's talk about my favorite, one of my favorite topics. Above the trees says, so you're either slow or such a boomer you can't find chat. So now I want to know, is this person still around? They probably left. His last comment was 7:48 a.m. So people, didn't get their attention in the chat, but I'll have quite a few things to say if he's still around, but I think he left. So, but this is instructive to the audience. So I will use this as an example of something, even if he's not still listening. So, and I do my own version of assuming and where I guess about things, and I do deductive reasoning and Sherlock Holmes. And I understand, with the accent and the way I sound, that people will get certain ideas, right? But so he says you're either slow or such a boomer you can't find chat, right? Well, here's my secret above the trees, who will probably never hear this, is that Benton here, what's up, Rick? Benton here has been on the internet effectively every day going back to 1994, and that's not an exaggeration, right? Effectively every single day since 1994, I have connected to the internet and used the internet. So um, I can't ever be in the boomer category with respect to um, boomers, because I typed out my first web page in HTML code in 1995, right? And was on the internet, and bracket HTML, open bracket HTML, in bracket, and typing out a motherfucking web page, and there wasn't yet I didn't even have access to an HTML editor at the time. It's just fucking text. Open up Notepad and start fucking typing. Right. That's how far back I go on the internet. And, depending on the age of the commenter, it's quite possible that I've been on the internet longer than this person's been alive, so there's very few, and I understand there is no Gen X online. It's a boomer, right? But, imagine a Gen Xer who's been on the internet who's 50 and has been on the internet for the entirety of their adult life. I was barely 18 when I got on the internet for the first time. I turned 18 in August and then of 93, and then would have been on the internet by early 94. I was barely 18. So, and I do now, it's regrettable that I was unable to find the commenter, right? Who actually, and I addressed at the top of the stream that I was intentionally not reading the chat. So, and I find this instructive, for the audience. I find this instructive because it does kind of show what's going on YouTube, right? And show me a human, I'll show you a hypocrite. I myself engage in some of this, and it's fine. And I appreciate the person sharing their own thoughts, hearing me talk for the first time. Although I have occasionally been on a Thorpe stream here and there, so I get it. I get it. But yeah, it is interesting to people just assume, right? And I do that too. I profile. I put people in sort of in boxes in my mind. And I'll say this: I was broadcasting audio in the form of a podcast. I had an MP3 file on my own website, available to anybody who knew what a podcast was and was able to use a podcast reader, that was a small group of people in 2011, sir. And again, he's not listening, but something in me still righteously feels the need to correct the record. I had a podcast live on the internet in 2011, and that involved me, again, like the example of just typing my first web page in Word, in Notepad, and just typing it out. That involved me with starting with a blank page in Notepad, typing out a fucking an RSS.xml file, right? And then, so anybody who's still listening, and for some reason, part of me wants that user to see me say this, but it's probably for the best that he doesn't, because he's the type that might be in here, having a go at these various spiritual ideas, which is fine, but it's not necessarily needed or wanted. If I was to actually keep, so that's probably not a new user that's been attracted, at least temporarily, who would then remain, right? But yeah, I do like to draw these distinctions. Okay. It is important. There is, those are accomplishments, being on the internet going all the way back to 94, you know, coding my own web page in 1995, then, making podcasts and putting them on a proper RSS feed in 2011, and I talked about this yesterday. I did that, or the day before, I did that by literally, right? No hyperbole, locked myself in a room for 3 straight days, banging my head against the keyboard of a computer to figure out how to do all of these things, teaching myself how to do it. Right. Um, but yeah, I understand the rambling discourse, certainly. Although if one listens with the proper ear, what they'll see is that what sounds like rambling more often than not is all sort of neatly tied up, although are certain, tangents explored and then abandoned, right? Yeah, of course, that does happen as well. And thank you for, listening for a few moments. Always appreciated, certainly, that anybody would listen to me, right? And I'll avoid the CBO critiques for now, but I'll just read what the commenter said. CBO found young wife and doesn't care about truth anymore. Well, that's the commenter saying that, not me. So I don't view it that way. What I would say is, well, good on him for finding the young wife, number one, because there are still women who want babies. I know that's it's shocking, right? It's shocking in 2025 America that there's still, you know, and I don't know the age of Layla exactly, but she might be aging out of young, but certainly, and that's not a diss or pejorative. I actually don't know how old she is. I guess she's still in her 20s. I really don't know. And uh, also, big fan. I've been a big fan of Miss Layla since she was introduced. Um, big fan. And then, you know, there are still women who want babies, right? And who want to do it in the, traditional sense. And if she's able to, again, none of my business, but, if Drew is able to earn a living and have, you know, what I grew up with, my dad made the money, my mom, kept the home, right? Um, who wouldn't support that, right? Well, there's people that don't support it, but so I'm not going to be critical on that account. What I will say is, if the person is asserting that he doesn't care about truth anymore, this is where it becomes instructive. And I'm not saying that. If that's the case, that means back when people believed that he did care about truth, what I would say is, well, he probably did not care about truth at that time. And then we also get into what's meant by truth, because what's referred to as truth oftentimes is not representative of truth. Is a specific truth, only exists in a specific form, which is manifested living truth, right? It must be in flow. It must be alive. It must be a living thing. If it's dead, right, once it stops moving, it dies. If it can be grasped as a concept and held to the person, that's dead. Like, and that's the thing about these discourses, is if they're not moving forward, right? So the commenter has helped me out here. If the discourse is not being moved forward, the discourse itself is dead. And that's why when I go back to these channels, that the level of discourse and the level of thinking has not progressed. Now, the discourse has changed in a way because the news cycle has changed. And what the masses seem to be willing to not support, what the masses are seemingly willing to identify and align themselves with at the levels of political correctness or lack thereof, or their willingness to actually express some of their truly held views, right? Because remember, Benton, let's not forget, Benton was in a so-called truth community, and um, I remember it went on for about a week where I made the mistake, apparently, of saying that I was an anarchist at heart, and was immediately attacked very strongly by these folks, which is fine, but like, wait a minute, I'm sharing something, and I'm wanting to talk about it at a level of ideas, you know. And when I say anarchist at heart, doesn't that imply that the head has already examined what the heart wants and said, well, that can't be fully, fleshed out and put into practice. I mean, I thought that's what that implied, but that, you know, it just that ring with me, like I do respond to anarchist type ideas, at a certain level. And why is that wrong? And then that fits perfectly into the Christian notion, the churchgoer notion of lowly, wretched, fallen sinner, which is that's now viewed as some sort of lack of morality. Oh, he's so fallen, right? That he would have the ability to respond favorably to notions around anarchism. And what I would counteract with is, well, clearly there's something within these other folks that's capable of responding favorably to authoritarianism, right? And in fact, that would be built into Christian religion as presented. However, I would not then need to attack them at the level of their own, presumed humanity, right? If that makes sense. That would not be a thing. What's up, slow boy? I see you down there. Anyway, I'm going to go back to not reading the chat if that's okay. Thank y'all. But yeah, that was funny to read those comments and also to realize that I've probably not recently, but at some point in the last several years, I've probably done that exact same thing to somebody in a live chat. Maybe somebody like a Robert Escobar, sort of just try to have a go at him in his own live chat, right? Um, and in fact, above the law commenter, uh, I will probably go back to turning the live chat off again, most likely. I'm tolerating having a live chat at this point. Um, Either way, and I'm trying not to have moderators anymore either, if possible. We'll see how that goes. Um, so yeah, it's all interesting. Um, it's all food for thought early in the morning. I do realize I'm probably going to need to start going for a walk every morning before these streams. I'm a little too cranky old man right now. It's kind of a thing. Yeah, I'm already wanting my second cup of egg drink because it's got the yerba mate in it, which does have a decent amount of caffeine. So back to the caffeine addiction, just in a different form, you know. Um, but yeah, I feel like I've covered a lot of that. And then, the mental energies. And it's funny, my ears have been ringing, the tinnitus way more. And that comes and goes. And I noticed it real strongly yesterday. And then I've had a little bit this morning. And, whether it's the potential for early onset dementia or whatever's going on, I'm noticing less cognitive ability this morning. I noticed that my diction is not quite as sharp. I'm having trouble, pronouncing my words, you so that's a thing. Um, a bit of an up and down, some days I'm sharper, some days I'm less sharp, now what I would say about the Ben Thorpe comparisons is, I've never known Ben to go live and just talk for 2 hours. Now, I'm not saying he's never done it. I've never seen it. I'm sure he could, but let's put it in the proper context, please. And this guy doesn't know my channel, and maybe he'll um, become interested. And then homeless man's antics, and I knew that was a mistake on some level, that would draw in some folks that this is not going to be their cup of tea, right? And then I have spent so much time in the past doing what I call crowd work, which is, reading the chat and reacting to the chat for long, long periods of time, that I'm just sort of over it personally. I'm just over it. So now there was a time when I wasn't streaming on a regular schedule. And if I went live at a certain time of day, there might be 30 people in here, and I might want to do crowd work, But yeah, not feeling the crowd work. And then we have I've already been to sleep and woken up, and a lot of people I'm talking, not everybody, but some of the folks, probably that above the law character, he's up all night crew probably, although not necessarily. So all of these things become factors. And then, we watch the algorithm, um, as I did begin to respond to the chat, surprise, surprise, the numbers went up because, the way the YouTube algorithm works is, engagement, uh, and all of that, which is fine. I get it. But yes, we are certainly rambling now. And above the law wouldn't have any way of knowing this, but there is a banner in StreamYard already ready. Let's go to the banner. This happens sometimes. I did not just create this. This is always there in the banners. The non-tent banner goes up. When I still feel like talking, but then I know that I'm become so rambling that it's no longer content. I just go ahead and put up the non-tent banner. So, please be aware of that as well, sir. And I understand the boomer time critiques also, but and I hopefully I can finish on this. And I know above the law, I really wish I'd caught him when he was here, but there's been multiple times that somebody came into the chat and tried to have a go at me at the level of boomerism, and I so thoroughly defeated them that I actually predicted their responses to what I was saying before they could type it into the chat. So they would type a chat, I would immediately respond to it and counter the point they made, and then I would go ahead and say, and now here's what you're going to say in response to my response, and then they would type exactly what I already predicted. I've done that multiple times. So. But now I feel myself getting a little too arrogant and puffed up with pride. So that's improper identification. So give me a moment. We'll go back to proper identification. Yes, indeed. Good stuff. Let the temporary negative states of being uh, flow away from me there, with a little bit of healing as some of those stagnated energies leave, and also a lot more working with spiritual concepts and prayer within myself lately. And again, working with that spiritual genius, right? And that is spiritual genius when the Holy Ghost enters in, folks. That is representative of spiritual genius, the comforter, which is teaching Benton all things. Certainly. Oh, more chats. Thank you. Thank you. Uh, Ting, you're now Ting. The commenter says, heed the non-tent banner, gentlemen. We used to have a 40. Can you listen to this shit? We used to have a 40% female audience at a minimum. That's now over with. So yeah, gentleman's certainly the correct term. Although at least one lady stopped by so far. But yes, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. An hour and 13 minutes in. I started too early though. It's not even 6 o'clock usually, and I'm not wrapping up, but usually when I'm thinking it might be time to start looking at wrapping up, it's usually a little closer to 7 Pacific, but it's not even 6. And it's the bathroom break is the problem. The problem is that the regularly scheduled bathroom breaks are just not going to happen unless I make myself take a walk and sort of wait around until the body's ready. What happens is now I end up doing the streams, uh, and just the performance and the speaking and the concentration makes it to where the body's not going to go and do its business, right? So it's probably right about poop time, or it was. So that's how much I enjoy doing these streams, apparently. To eschew poop time. Yeah. And a couple of people leave on the mention of poop time, which I get it. I understand. I get it. Let me take another gander at the notes here. Um, But yeah, just the idea of Trump's martial law, is a good thing. Well, that obviously depends on one's perspective, as I was just outlining the perspective. The Mark Passio notion of these people they don't want to fix the government to where it's going to provide a way for the most vulnerable people in society, the weakest members of society. So when I to protect them and keep them from being preyed upon, when the reality is Americans have already chosen with their actions, Americans have chosen corporations above all. And corporations, and I talked about this earlier in the broadcast, corporations, they victimize and take advantage of the most helpless members of society in order to enrich the richest and most powerful within society. And it's not possible to have a proper society under those conditions. You can't have the lowest of the low from the perspective of being able to fend for themselves. And if you think about how helpless a child is, a newborn, a toddler, well, a lot of people in the underclass, the proletariat, these people who are standing around a Home Depot somewhere waiting for work. The fact is, at an intellectual level, and I understand the what seems like irony of somebody who talks like me, the smartest person who sounds the dumbest, saying these things, but in a Southern accent, while slurring his words to some extent, but not because of substances, because of something going on in the cognition. But these people are helpless on some level, and I recognize this recently being in Los Angeles, and it's all hands on deck to keep an eye out for the potential appearance on the scene of ICE, and then a lot of attention directed my way by people who are proving that they lack the ability to distinguish a homeless person who has sort of a specific bearing, a serious manner, and visually fits the face and the haircut. Parts of my physicality would fit in with this, but then when examined, this can't be. When does ICE go around by themselves just walking down the sidewalk, speed walking on the sidewalk? Right, this is just not a thing. This is, and what would be the advantage of this tactic? It's a 5'10", 140-pound, 50-year-old man walking at top speed. And then it's like, okay, based on the mix of people in the local area, this is most likely to be a homeless person. Like, for real. Although the styles in LA, is skewed so much homeless chic that, it is in some ways, I could be one of the gentrifiers, right? Because that's the white people who live here are viewed as gentrifiers. But then somehow they're accepted into society. It's very strange in a way. So what I'm talking about, these helpless people, they have no defense against any of this. I mean, I had one just blatantly took my picture a couple of weeks back because there's probably some app somewhere to say, hey, this is maybe potential ICE sighting, and then somebody else will probably comment, oh, that's just that. Would y'all please quit posting this guy? This is just a local homeless guy. I'm assuming there's some version of that going on in some app somewhere. It's like, yeah, that guy, he minds his business, he leaves people alone, and then every once in a while, maybe he fucking gives some kind of speech or sermon in the streets, right? And every once in a while, somebody, maybe he yells at somebody who's fucking with him or whatever, right? That's about it. you know, he really doesn't do too much, you know. Uh, and so that's what I mean by helpless. They don't have the capacity. Now, it's not because of their race. It's not because of where they grew up. It's, you know, the children that they have that grow up in America, a lot of them are going to be lawyers and, pharmacists, and they're going to go get an education. Isn't that what first, uh, the children of first generation, people that come to the country, there, that next generation that's born here isn't that typically what they do? Sort of overachiever types, isn't that's part of the American dream. And the American dream, I hate to break it to you folks, it's always for people who are more likely to be new to the country, because the American dream is historically has been, if a person is willing to work way too hard for less money, right, and to live below their means, to scrimp and save, and to get up enough of a stake to then maybe start their own business, that the opportunity is here, right, to make a go of it, compared to whatever's going on in the area in which they chose to leave, right? And it's not like every person in Honduras is actively trying to come to America. See, in America, if you read about America historically, and this is where the earlier commenter might find that um, I diverge from Ben Thorpe. I can tie this into something like poker. This James McManus, this poker writer, he wrote a book about, um, had a lot to do with why is poker as a game of skill with a luck element, why do Americans dominate it? And he tied it into that America is representative of a country's representative of a self-selecting group of people who will leave their home country and go into uncertainty and take on a risk to potentially get a great reward. And that, these are descendants of people who are more inclined to risk taking, and then whatever those characteristics are. And that poker as a skill game of incomplete information involves a lot of knowing when to put a lot of the chips at risk strategically in order to win some chips, if that makes sense. And that, to this day, America is always overrepresented when it comes to the best poker players in the world versus, historically, if you look at something like chess, Russian dominated to some extent, although I think the Ukrainians were probably included, um, when that was all the USSR. But do you see what I'm showing you here? Right. Shout out to Jurassic Liars 26. Hopefully you're able to see what I'm showing you here is that this American dream and all of this ideas about these notions of what America is. I don't know that America's understood well or at all. And I include myself in that. And maybe Benton here is being brought into an understanding of what America actually is functionally versus what America claims to be, if that makes sense. And so why is Benton not worried about the home being potentially rounded up as a homeless person? It's because Benton has maintained himself at the level of his mental health, not being a drunk, not being addicted to drugs, and never having been, although certainly practiced alcoholism for a while. Oh, Christ delivered me from it, delivered from the drink in the name of the Lord Christ Jesus, right? Real talk. And I can, when necessary, and did this as recently as however many months ago, within the last 6 months ago, drove a motherfucking big rig, and now I only drove it for 6 weeks, but I did not work a job for an entire year to applying for truck driving jobs electronically, got hired the next day, and then just immediately back into the seat of a big rig, um, and never missed a beat. That first week was a bit of an adjustment on some level, whereas they tried to put me in a position like my first or second day back where they wanted me at the end of my clock. They wanted me to go into rush hour Dallas Fort Worth traffic and try to go make a pickup. And at the risk of running out of time and just getting stranded somewhere, like for real, or at least creating a situation to have to, be able to have the company enable a personal conveyance option just to get back to the terminal, right, on the electronic logs. And I just was like, no, I'm not doing that. That's crazy. Whereas a couple of weeks later, I might have been inclined to just say, okay, fuck it. I can probably pull it off. Why not? We'll just do what they're asking. See? And so, because I know myself and I trust myself, I'm not worried because, you know, during these roundups, that I fully expect to happen, I fully expect the roundup of the homeless in the streets. And am I in favor of it? Um, I'm not in favor of the martial law aspects. I'm in favor of the, if this is going to be made to happen, right, on the West Coast, it will at least, the people here will at least demand that attempts are made to do it in a way that they consider proper, which is to treat the mentally ill street level drug addicts as if they might be actual human beings, where the right wing is not going to treat them as if they might be human beings. But that also, what I've talked about is that also happens to somebody who ends up in a county jail, and, you know, like, I think it's like Johnson County, Tennessee, or somewhere that's notorious county jail. I think the town there is it Kingston? I think that's where Kingston, Tennessee is. Uh, you know, I only really know it from truck driving. So far northeast Tennessee, I believe. And if anybody's not well acquainted with Tennessee, it's not that tall, but it's very long across, right? So you're damn near in Virginia at that point, I believe, um, in that part of Tennessee. And so what I said about the, when they first started detaining the migrants and there was all this talk of the horrific conditions, what I said was, well, as long as they're being treated as well as somebody would be treated at the Johnson County jail, I guess it's okay. Meaning, you know, America as a country has already agreed that, and I'm from the deep South, man, the most barbaric part of the country historically, right? Like, I rose up out of barbarism, lest we forget. Like, where I'm from on the map of the US historically is quite barbaric, right? So in my world, if somebody ends up in the Johnson County jail or whatever and they're treated to, you know, dungeon like barbaric conditions, well, that's just what happened. So same thing with these, you know, folks who are being detained or whatever at their immigration status is, you know, um, I'm not expecting the rolling out of the red carpet. But I am expecting them to be treated as if they might be human beings, and they are human beings. So the West Coast will probably do a pretty good job of that. And so what we're seeing in San Francisco right now is, and this is probably, you know, the governor getting the directive, and then the recent court decision, where now it's, you know, the Grants Pass court decision, Grants Pass, Oregon, where it's, which I'm well acquainted with, where it's now okay. So that's made it okay nationwide to dismantle these homeless camps. I've never been in favor of homeless camps personally. Now the city model, where the city provides, you know, tiny homes or a place to, you know, their own, like Eugene, Oregon. I've spent a lot of time in Eugene, Oregon, and they have several of these things, and it became a model that's, you know, has spread across the country to some extent. And as we know, there's plenty of these types, street level types, who just simply are not going to follow the rules no matter what happens. So they can't live in one of these camps, right? The city ran camps. But so clearly the directive's gone out to where, you know, I'm now seeing that, you know, city of San Francisco, you know, they're going to start towing, or they have started towing a lot of these RVs off the streets. And I don't know what's going to happen in Oakland. Oakland's, you know, even worse with a lot of this stuff, but at least in the city limits of San Francisco. But because of these notions around compassion and compassionate care, you know, there's going to be social workers provided, and there's going to be at least a path. Reality is, most of these folks are not going to be interested in pursuing that path, and they're going to continue to do what they've already done, which is to just allow themselves to be moved along. And then if they were in an RV and they lose the RV, they're going to go back to fending for themselves without an RV until another RV situation presents itself, and then they'll just find it, or they'll just go to another area where they're able to do these things, right? But then that will at least provide, there will be some number of the people, the homeless folks, who will say, fuck it, yeah, I'm ready. They're ready to go into some version of housing, that's how I ended up driving a truck, because I just got so tired of dealing with the meth heads on the streets that I was like, fuck it, taking my ass to the Salvation Army in Austin. And next thing you know, a couple months later, I'm in truck driving school and worked a job the whole time, right? While sleeping in a dormitory, um, a dorm with 100 other guys, and it was, jail rules, and I've never been to jail. Well, one weekend in jail in my whole life, and but it's like jail culture, you know, using the bathroom in the morning and coming back to the sink, and somebody's done moved my stuff, even though there's like 10 available sinks, and now I gotta, because I know it's jail rules, I gotta be like, who the fuck moved my stuff? Even though I don't give a fuck. I'm like, that's weird, they moved my stuff. But it's like, oh, well, now the word's going to get around, that guy might be punkable, right? It's like, I don't even give a fuck. Next thing you know, I'm on the verges of a fist fight. Meanwhile, if I get in the fist fight, I'm kicked out of the Salvation Army, and I'm still trying to go to truck driving school. So I'm at the Salvation Army, right? And this is the landmines that the homeless people must navigate. I've navigated these systems. So I got to know when I'm squaring off with this dude who I probably could at the time have taken in a fight, most likely, or at least held my own. It's like, yeah, but if it goes down, we're probably both kicked out of here, right? So now I got to handle this, and I'm not inclined to fight in the first place. But it's funny because of, probably I would have just chosen to leave versus have the fight. But now it's like, okay, what do I do? Because, now it's like no CDL, right? Why am I saying like so much? I have no idea. Um, that's the way all of this works. It's to understand strategically. And this is why so many homeless people, even if they want to better themselves, to not understand that spiritually, they're going to be attacked on some level, and that the systems in place are actually going to be sort of weaponized against them, and all of these obstacles are going to be placed in their path. And if they don't overcome the obstacles, the system's not going to pick them up and set them right again. The system will potentially provide them with a path that they are going to have to manage. And a lot of these folks just simply don't have the ability to manage that because they can't manage themselves. And that's the majority of humanity, is unable to manage themselves within themselves, which is how we get into externally wanting to group up. And oh, well, now there seems to be an opportunity to sort of take power within the government at a level of MAGA or right wing. And we see a lot of these so-called truthers are revealing themselves. And I've said before, everyone always reveals themselves over time. And again, I can't begrudge somebody who says, well, I have a wife, I have a family, young children to care for, and they would prefer to do that in a world in which, the situation is stabilized enough at a societal level where their children will be able to, go into the trades, or, maybe, have their own business, whatever that is, right? However, these kids go and make money once they're adults. Now, what I would counteract with is, if that happens, by the time they become old enough as adults, 25, 30, 35, the world and the society will probably have swung back the other way by then, more back to the lefty woke or some new version of that, so that it seems like it's not going to happen at a level of permanence, although I guess it could, right? So I think that's the mistake, is approaching it as if societies now was moving in the wrong direction towards the woke and the leftist communism, to now say, okay, well, now it's seemingly, and this is not my view, I'm speaking, as this other group, I don't see it this way. I don't even like looking at the left versus the right. But in their mind, okay, it's seemingly swinging back towards the way that that they would prefer to raise their children. And then, but it's still going to be most likely an unstable environment in the long run of their children's lives. So now, are their children going to be put in a position to, okay, it's grandbaby time, but then grandbabies are now growing up with whatever that version in the future will be of, um, all of the things that the right leaning people are against, all the woke and the LGBT stuff, and whatever the new version of that ends up being, right? That's what I see happening anyway, and not that I'm correct, but so to me, it's like, okay, what's the benefit then of in the short run identifying with, you know, all of this right wing stuff and gulags and camps and rounding people up? I'm against that full stop, but I'm not against the cleanup of the streets. It is possible in my view. Now, I will say this: the harsh crackdowns initially, but then a rolling back to less restriction, that can be effective, certainly. So in some way, is this idea of government martial law, I wouldn't view it as good. I would view it as it can be helpful as long as it's not, as long as it doesn't become something permanent. However, it will become something permanent. The government being, once the populace shows that it's okay with uh, these in your face authoritarian measures without the pretense, these unsubtle, right, subtle as a brick, um, authoritarian police state measures, jackbooted oppressor thugs on the streets, right? Once this happens, well, it's now the horse is out of the barn. It's a bell that can't be unrung, and it won't go away. It will just remain, right? And then, I'm assuming that California will leave the U.S. at some point. Um, I'm assuming that. My predictions are not the best, but so I don't know. I wouldn't even call that a prediction. But the fact that Oregon, Washington, and California, and that's probably a timing thing, because it's only going to be done in ways that suit the system. It's not going to be done, so whatever's going on with the MAGA and the right wing, that's always under the context of what is beneficial for the system, what strengthens the system. And I think that's what these folks have forgotten, probably, is these ideas must be reconciled through Kaczynski, the the Unabomber. It has to happen. It has to be reconciled, and it's not being reconciled. Meaning, yes, we understand that these reforms are being made, and the cleanup of the streets, and deportations, that it's happening. However, there's these ideas very intelligently laid out by Theodore John Kaczynski that it, in the long run, or even the near run or the midterm, all of these changes are actually going to support and further propagate the system itself, which I was under the impression that we all agreed, the truthers all agreed, was just bad, 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 bad. Right. And what we're seeing is that people are just simply going to go along with the programming, and they're going to go along with what they believe and see as in their best interest. And what I'm saying is that cannot be accomplished while simultaneously following the teachings of Christ. It's one or the other. So I'm choosing the teachings of Christ as I understand them, and as the comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, is teaching me within myself. Right. And also with the having unlocked the achievement within the game of true knowledge of self/self-realization. Right. So that's the context. Exactly, Joe Moore. And Joe Moore says everything the government does becomes weaponized. Yeah, that's exactly, Joe. And furthermore, it's it's the ways in which things are weaponized, and it's who are the weapons used against, and who or what, what's the weaponization. It's conducted on behalf of money and power, the actual rich folks. Again, the function of the economy is to make rich people richer every new moment into perpetuity. A big problem for MAGA that I don't think they see as a big problem is they're never going to become rich. They're never going to enter into that class, right? Now, will they in the future? And some of them are now experiencing relative affluence. That's that so-called middle class. Guess what? That's still to be poor. Everybody in this country who's not actually wealthy is poor. It's one or the other. It's a binary. It's rich folks and poor folks. And a lot of the people that we think of as rich are not rich, right? Rich is a rich person cannot become unrich. This is very important to realize. They're insulated and protected because of the family having access to such great wealth. The family in the financial the finances and the wealth of the family is structured in such a way that nobody can just be born and then become a loose cannon and undo the wealth of the family. It's not possible. See, it cannot happen. They're protected from themselves on those levels. That's what I mean by rich folks. um, yes, very much so, very much so. Anyway, quick break. We're going to come back. Brief break, returning shortly. Banner is up. Mic is muted. BRB. All right, I'm kind of back. I'm going to throw down this another round of the mushrooms. I'm struggling this morning, folks, and I think I know why. I'm going to talk to you folks about that. What's up, Mr. Miyagi? He says, by the way, good day, sir. Just driving by after CBO. Yeah, that was, I haven't watched CBO, but um, I don't know. You tell me what's wrong with, Mr. Miyagi says, what's wrong with being poor? I don't know, man. You tell me what's wrong with it. Uh, you tell me. By the way, good day, sir. Benton, just driving by after CBO. Yeah, man. Thanks for stopping by. Indeed, sir. Well, I find a lot of, yeah, he says, isn't it written the meek shall inherit the earth? Well, I have a lot of things I could probably say about that, but I shan't right now. But yeah, that's interesting food for thought there, Mr. Miyagi. Interesting food for thought to be sure. Um, I'll resist the urge to get into that just now, but you're not. You bring up a valid point. How about that? You bring up a valid point. Now, I might question the utility of inheriting the earth at this point, but it's that's certainly in the book, to my knowledge. But yeah, bear with me while I attempt to multitask and throw some mushroom powder in my mouth and wash it down with some water. All right, where is it? There it is. hopefully without inhaling it. I don't know that everybody knows that I used to ingest large amounts of kratom powder on a regular basis. And I'll tell you this, I don't recommend kratom. And what I would say is kratom is pretty good shit, but if the person never uses it 2 days in a row, because it is very addictive, and the withdrawals for somebody who's never been an opiate user, such as myself, the withdrawals are fucking horrible. And so I didn't understand not to use, and the dose skyrockets. If you use it every day, the same effect from a small amount in like 2 weeks, it takes like 20 times that amount, if that makes sense. So, and the withdrawals are horrific. Now, a person that's had actual opiate withdrawals would probably say, well, that's nothing. It's like, yeah, I understand, but you know, I'm planning on never experiencing the dope sickness. I don't expect to ever experience the dope sickness, so I wouldn't know. It's kind of like these hard drugs I've never taken. It's like, yeah, I don't want to try them because I don't know what I'm missing, you know. And folks can believe what they want. I've never one time tried most drugs. Mm, mm-hmm. Mm, mm, mm-hmm. Oh, and because I'm such an adept internet user, that back in the day when I was on the Kratom, that I was able to find a really good supplier online through a message board, and I was getting the really good shit. You know, the quality varies, and man, it was pretty amazing. But then, not when it came to and severe constipation from all the powder, because it's literally powdered leaves from like a shrub or a bush or like a small tree. Ground up leaves ground up into a dried out leaves ground up into a powder, and yeah, not so great for the digestion, certainly. Anyway, are we back? We're back. All right, let's get rid of this banner. Oh, we lost a few folks, but that's all right. That happens. And yeah, we'll just go ahead and put up the non-tent. I'm just going to ramble for the rest of this. And so, back to the cleanup of the streets. What I see is just the populace, unfortunately, are just not at a level individually to be able to sort of parse out and to really be able to, again, exercise any sort of authority over these processes. So what's going to happen is the government is going to do what's in the best interest of the system, and a lot of that's going to have to do with what the power and the money wants. And it looks like what the power and the money wants in the short term is, and I don't know what China's like, but I believe what's going to happen is the American cities are going to be operated more like what it seems like cities in, large cities are in China. You know, uh, lockdowns. Again, anytime the government feels like it, you know, uh, tanks on the streets, jackbooted thugs on the streets. The goon squad, and so America doesn't seem like it's interested in, and the people seemingly are no longer demanding the Yankee Doodle Dandy view of America, where it's like, oh, we're the freest nation, we're the richest nation. Um, Now let's do this, because I still hear this richest country in human history, the richest country on earth. And I know just enough about economics to say, well, wait a minute. If that was true, then let's Google uh, GDP per capita by country. So America, as richest country in the world, wouldn't they be number one? This is list of countries by GDP per capita. That's gross domestic product, which is generally considered. And again, I'm not an economist, so do your own research. But that's generally considered the measure of the total size of an economy, right? So are they saying richest because America, I think, still has the largest GDP? I'm not even sure if that's the case anymore. It might be China by now. And it was Japan for a long time, I'm pretty sure. Actually, and it's funny because this idea of America as the richest country, Japan was far and away, um, especially on a per capita basis. Japan was off the fucking charts for a long time economically. People forget that. So let's see. Here's the table. So let's go to estimate. So this says Monaco is the number one country for GDP per capita, which is the total GDP divided by the population. So Monaco, then we have Liechtenstein, if I'm saying that right, or Liechtenstein, whatever that is. That's number two. But then it says number one Luxembourg. So I don't know. Maybe they don't consider. Maybe Monaco and Liechtenstein don't officially. Maybe those aren't official countries or something. I don't know exactly what that is. So let's just go by their actual numbers. So Luxembourg, number one. Ireland, number two. Switzerland, number three. Singapore, number four. Iceland, number five. Six, Norway, seven, US. So how can US be the number one richest country of all time and they're number seven on GDP per capita? Does that make sense to anybody? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. And where's China? China. And where's Japan? So this is not the richest country. It's just not. It's simply not. Now let's go to just total GDP. See countries ranked by GDP. Countries ranked by GDP. United States, 25 trillion. So still quite a bit larger than China at 14 trillion. And then Japan, 4.25 trillion. And then who even knows if these numbers are, right or not? But actually, that's not Wikipedia. So let's just go to Wikipedia. Yeah, U.S. still by far has the largest size economy. Now, how many countries owe more money than uh, than their GDP? Because U.S. is in that group. Uh, List of countries with larger outstanding debt. Can't even spell outstanding. I can. I can't hit the right keys. Standing debt than GDP. Oh, okay. Belgium, France, Greece, Italy, Japan, United States, Spain, Canada, Singapore. There's a bunch of them apparently. So I guess not that unusual. Japan has the most debt compared to GDP. It just at a first glance Google search anyway. We'd have to dig deeper to find out if that was actually the case or not. Yeah, I'm not feeling well, man. This is And I'm realizing that, uh, and I hate to say this, but it's probably true that I talked to my mom for about an hour on my birthday yesterday, and it was funny because I really, had no plans to talk to her on the phone. But at a certain point, I said, I might as well give her a gift, right? Which is, uh, she's my mom, wants to hear my voice and all of these things. But then it ended up me just talking about, and, I listened to her some too, talking about spiritual concepts for most of the time. And then with the unlocking of the achievement of true knowledge of self and being properly identified, it's refreshing to at least be able to have a conversation with my mom without, getting angry or, certain resentments cropping up, and being able to, be detached from, things she's going to bring up, that are going to be, she's just misremembered some stuff, which is fine because, she almost died during the pandemic, and it really affected her cognition. She seems to have recovered quite a bit cognitively. And she's 70, of course, but she's sharp for a 70-year-old from Arkansas, especially. Um, and then I got my sisters, who are both quite manipulative and, you know, dare I say, Machiavellian. And of course, they've done a number on her, program. And my mother and my father joined a cult when they were like 20 years old. And so these are people who've been programmed, and they remain programmable, because especially having left the cult that they joined. And so I'm pretty sure my sisters are finding it quite easy to, mind control my mom on some level, because some of the stuff she said to me is just she believes it to be true, and it's just simply untrue. And so to go through all of that without getting angry, but also knowing, or without feeling like there's a score to settle, or a record to correct, that. So I do know that, much of what I've said is now being repeated out of context to other people in my family. And then, um, sadly, the state of spirituality, um, with respect to the nature of this realm, and, what Benton knows himself to be, the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, existing. Might have to turn the non-tent banner off, actually, if I'm going to get into this. Uh, with the way that exists, in opposition to what I am, or, as a, uh, making an enemy of what I am. And, that is one of the many ways that differentiates me from the rest of my family. And then, people who are invested in like a family structure, and then extended families and blended families. And, my mom's married to and lives with a guy that, I'm not blood relations with. And, both of my sisters are married, and, just the whole thing. It just becomes this whole thing. And so now, versions of what my mom thinks I was saying, but she's not going to understand the concepts well enough. It's going to get repeated. And then, you know, somewhat famously, the last time I ever talked to my baby sister was actually on stream, except I had somebody on panel, and I just let them, you know, uh, I let them give a discourse, and I went and talked to my sister for a while, off stream. And she's, just spiritually, there's a lot of problems, and but it's funny because it gets tied into a Christian context with certain folks, and a Jesus. So by the end of the call, she's asking me questions about Christ and God and all of this, and I'm affirming what I know to be true, and then she's trying to tell me like dogma and doctrine, and, well, you have to do it this way and you have to do it that way. And then I'm rejecting what she's saying, which is like, I'm firmly asserting, well, that doesn't apply to me. And then this is the spiritual attack, where she just kept coming back at me in a way that I felt was quite evil, and I felt attacked spiritually. And I just kept, rejecting what she was saying, and finally just, I think she hung up the phone. Maybe, I'm not exactly sure what happened, but you could tell in her tone of voice that she was thinking there was something wrong with me, but it's not. And then, you know, being delivered, testimony, being able to testify that I've been delivered from wicked spirits, unclean spirits, and demonic spirits in the name of the Lord Christ Jesus. I've been delivered from practicing alcoholism and from craving alcohol in the name of the Lord Christ Jesus. And nothing against my baby sister. She's a nurse, and I'm pretty sure she still engages in, substance abuse on some level. And none of my business. I'm just assuming that to be the case. I don't know that, right? I've heard no stories of any of my families, testifying what Christ has done in their life. And then, part of my testimony also is to the great healing that continues up until this exact moment, this great access to this great healing and restoration. And, it shows, right? It shows, people are able to see it, oh, you sound different, you seem better, this and that. And, I even mentioned to my mom, it's like, uh, a mild critique of how I know I'll be treated, were I to interact with my family. It's, I'm basically like, why is there no recognition of this great healing? You know, and my mom didn't even know what I was talking about. And I said, well, me, how ill I've been, for how ill I was for 4 straight years. And she's like, oh, I didn't even realize you were back to normal or whatever, which is not really true. But I said, well, I don't know that I'll fully ever be back to normal, because normal would be able to eat the junk food like everybody else. Not that I want to, but, that's probably never going to be a thing again, which good. I don't miss it anyway. But, um, uh, I would say I'm 85%, normal, as far as, I'm able to eat food, and my body weight has increased, to I'm now out, because I was underweight for almost all of that time, right? I got down to like 100, near 100 pounds. And I was at about a buck 20 for a long ass time. And, I'm finally settling in. It looks like around a buck 40. Um, and I'm a bit, it's going to sound ridiculous, but, not, you can have a person that's 5'10", 120 pounds. You can have two of them standing side by side, and one of them can be a much larger person. It's just, I know it sounds strange, but we see this in combat sports also. Like, for somebody who's 5'10", 140 pounds, I'm on the bigger side of that, where a lot of people would guess that I'm like a buck 60, probably, just from how I look. But either way, it doesn't even matter. Um, I know when I met Tom, if anybody knows Aluma Tommy, that I think we're exactly the same height, and probably we're the same weight, but just I'm just a bigger guy than he is. That's just what it is. But yeah, this has all happened. And the last time, uh, my mom has seen me enough times during that 4 years to understand how ill I was. And then, but there's no recognition of the healing, right? Why not? And again, if I'm saying these are the people who are now spiritually attacking me, right? On some level, or at least, this is coinciding with a time of spiritual attack. I know that anytime my ears start ringing, my ears were ringing quite a bit yesterday, and it's happening right now, and I can tell it's affecting my cognition and all of these things. And some of that maybe is just, but I got good rest. I've been resting a lot. Um, it's a bit of a mystery, but I'm just going to assume under spiritual attack. Well, what I am doesn't have any trouble dealing with spiritual attack. So proper identification prevents uh, prospering of weapons formed against the being, right? That's how that goes. All right, what are they chatting down there? Oh, Mr. Escobar. Yeah, there you go. See, Robert would say 150 to 160. I was like a buck 20 when I met you. No, I might have been a little bigger. I don't remember. Now, Rob, you got to email me, brother. I can't get into the personal answering of personal questions on the stream. And I'm not even saying that you're asking personal questions. I just mean, but yeah, if you really want to know, maybe I'll remember to send you an email later. Or if it's that important, send me an email. But yeah, good to see Mr. Escobar down there. And let's see, how long are we running here? What time is it? Let's take a gander at the old headlines real quick, and then I'll probably get out of here. And you don't have to email me. My apologies. I didn't mean to sound like I was giving directives, Mr. Escobar. At some point though, I need to get Robert's thoughts on all the crazy shit with the immigration crackdowns and whatnot. Of course, the mass deportations hasn't happened, as we know, as we see, and that was something I said was not going to happen in the first place. Yep. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. But yeah, all things can be answered. Certainly, I will say this: if you happen to know anybody that um, would pay me in cash, I might be interested. If you know anybody, if you don't know anybody, that's fine. I'm not asking for suggestions necessarily, but and in fact, I have stood at the Home Depots for work many times. But what I've seen about California is they really won't pick up a white boy at the Home Depot. But um, I was able to get a lot of work in Austin, Texas, standing with the amigos outside the Home Depot. I used to regularly get work that way, unskilled manual labor, which is why I'm not fearful of whatever the government's going to do to the homeless people, because it's like, yeah, if they need me to do some shit, I can probably do it. So let's go over to Drudge, and I don't need to be told the whatever political leanings Drudge expresses. I'm well aware. All right, a bunch of news about the mistreatment of detainees. Then we got Trump building police state. Well, it's already a police state. Trump is not doing anything. Number one. Number two, there's already a police state. It's been there for quite some time. Now, is the government at this time even more overtly putting the police state, furthering the police? Yes, but so he's building the police state, but that still implies to people that, well, America hasn't been a police state, but now Trump is making it into a police state. Well, no, it was already a police state, and the police state is expanding, which is pretty much what it's always doing anyway, lest we forget. And it says watch and monitor citizens. Yeah, already happening. Also, that's been happening. No matter who the president is, the government and the police state is watching and monitoring the citizens. But yes, now with the idea of deportations, which was already happening as well, and apparently Obama, you know, there was a lot of deportations under Obama and Biden, right? And this sort of shows you the mind control and the propaganda. Pentagon plans reaction force. Now, this might be a new thing. Pentagon plan would create military reaction force for civil unrest. And, I've assumed that things like this have already existed. So the fact that it's being announced can't be a good sign. But yeah, the Trump administration. So anytime I see Trump administration, I force my mind to say the government, because people still believe, oh, it's just somehow there's a President Trump and he wants to do all of these things and he's doing all of these things, him and his administration. No, that's not what's happening. The government is doing stuff, and it's doing it under a figurehead of Trump administration. Exactly. Thank you, Joe Moore. The District of Columbia is already the federal jurisdiction. Exactly. Exactly. Well, there you go. We got Robert Escobar predicting false flags. Yeah, you may very well be right, sir. The problem there is it's not a problem, but now the normies know what a false flag is. So it will be a very different thing, right? It'll be a little different than past false flags, because I remember working at a Walmart supercenter in Fayetteville, Arkansas, when I heard over I heard on the radio that the Oklahoma City thing happened. Well, that was most likely some version of a false flag, but I didn't know. I'd never heard the term false flag. And now and I was very much a normie at the time, not fully, but more normie than not normie back then. And, um, had knew nothing of all this conspiracy stuff back then. And, now pretty much everybody knows what a false flag is. So that just the fact that people are aware, the fact that a greater proportion of the populace will be aware of the concept when one happens, that will make it a very different thing, is the point I'm attempting to make. The government is evaluating plans that would establish a domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force comprised, see, it says composed, but I like the word comprised of hundreds of National Guard troops, uh, tasked with rapidly deploying into American cities facing protests or other unrest. So to me, that sounds like what China does, right? So up until this point, especially your rootin' tootin' MAGA types, mom and apple pie and American exceptionalism, richest country on earth type shit, which isn't even true, but those types would be like, yeah, America is better than Russia and China because we don't crack down on protests in the streets. Except now apparently we do. And by the way, I shouldn't even say we, because I don't view myself as part of that group, or I don't view myself in relation to the government. But yeah, the government has always done that, lest we forget. But the mind control and the perception in the minds of a lot of Americans has been that, well, that's what happens in China and in the Soviet Union, when there was a Soviet Union. That's America is exceptional for not doing that, even though presumably it would be able to if it chose to, the government, I mean. But then there's also a notion of the government fearing the people, and the people wouldn't accept it, and you know the powers that be are scared of the public, and none of that's true. That's all a bunch of lies. Of course it is. In a world of death and a game of lies, of course that's a bunch of lies. How could it not be a bunch of lies? Right. Yeah, well, predictive programming, Robert. And not trying to be a jerk. You're absolutely right, Robert. You're just a little behind with the context of the so-called truth community, but yeah, you're correct. Oh, I missed a comment. The anti-Trumpers are going to be begging Daddy Trump to save them from the aliens. Maybe, I don't know. See, now you're just mainstream truther. I hate to break it to you, Robert. Robert says it's going to be aliens. So, and again, no critique of Robert, but in the so-called truth community, 5 to 10 years ago, this was the talk, right? Like 5 to 10 years ago in the so-called truth community. So you're now saying the exact same stuff that was being said 5 to 10 years ago. But here's the problem for the so-called truthers is they haven't really moved their discourse forward. So they're still saying versions of that. It's just that they've interfaced with those ideas so long that they're more jaded towards it. It's become just sort of passe. It's become passe, and it's fallen out of fashion, the alien stuff, right? It's interesting how that operates within different groups. No, I didn't say you were a truther, Robert. See, this is where people start to lose. This is what happened, like when I talked to my mom yesterday. People don't hear, and I'm this way too. Like, this, to be a human is not to necessarily hear what the other person is saying. No, what I'm saying is that it's now truther talking points are now normalized and have been for several years. And this started to happen. It seems like this happened during the pandemic, where the truth community recognized that your average person has become a baby truther, right? It's uh and this had been somewhat predicted, and Drew from Chalk Body Outline predicted that conspiracies would become mainstream. So when I found Drew's channel, however many years ago, when I first found his channel and started listening, and then, that was my introduction. Actually, it wasn't. My introduction was through 9/11 documentaries, the idea of 9/11 truth. But what, you know, as far as panel channels and live streaming on YouTube, Drew was very influential from Chalk Body Outline. And then, I collaborated creatively, myself and others. And, Drew was very accurate predicting that all of this stuff would become mainstream. So, no, it's like you've been absorbed. What's happened, Robert, is that whatever it is, whatever zeitgeist is that you psychologically are aligned with, that zeitgeist has absorbed into itself trutherism, if that makes sense. So it's become part of whatever that is that you are already, that's already has absorbed you into it. Does that make sense? There you go. Yeah, thank you, Freedom Grower. Yeah, politicians just openly talk about conspiracies now, whereas 10 years ago, completely impossible. And so the so-called truth community, and probably I can't speak for a Freedom Grower, but I suspect this has been his experience. A lot of so-called truthers go through a phase where they sort of get lit up with all of these ideas. They learn a lot of information where they're able to tell people in public or online a lot of true, a lot of accurate information. And they in early phases, the truther is mistaken and believes that all of the problems are because of these vast conspiracies, and that if people only understood them intellectually, that of course the populace would rise up and defeat them, and that in fact the power structure fears the people on that basis. And what we found out is that's not the case at all. But um it was sort of a special thing. It was to be kind of in a select group of people who were sort of in the know. And then so now all of that, so and so sorry, so why am I don't even know what's going on at this point. My apologies, folks. Benton is struggling. We shall persist, we shall over, nevertheless he persisted. So and that's me telling myself a joke, ha ha ha. So there was a period of time when a lot of truthers, myself included, sort of martyred ourselves because of eventually accepting the futility of those efforts, and also understanding that if I say this true thing to this person, their knee jerk reaction is going to be, oh, are you one of those tinfoil hat people? Right. And in fact, I was on a message board for years called offtopic.com, and it was quite a big thing. There would be, 10,000 consecutive concurrent users at times. And, I was one of the well known posters. I had, I think by the time I quit, I had like 50,000 posts on this message board. I was very active, not the most active, but I was up there, and never in the running for, highest poster though. But 50K posts at a certain point was admirable on some level in that context. And somebody made one of those wikis where like the notable posters would have a biography, and mine, it had my name and it said wearer of tinfoil hats or something along those lines. That was the only description. It had my name and it said like wearer of tinfoil. They had some cutesy way they worded it, but it's basically like he wears a tinfoil hat. And it was me and one other guy where we were like the conspiracy theories. Me and one other dude, Private Joker, as I recall, we were the only conspiracy theorists on the entire motherfucking message board. And in fact, my ability to have message board arguments and flame wars, I developed my chops debating people about 9/11 truth on a message board in like 2005. And I could take on multiple people at a time with my 85 words a minute typing, and my use of the multi quote, on a message board and such, quoting portions of their arguments and dismantling them, right? uh, so yeah, that's sort of my origins and all of this stuff, if that makes sense. But yeah, now it's just normalized, right? It's the in fact, I was at the self checkout at Walmart years ago, but it was during the pandemic, and just some random woman, she just dropped like this entire fucking conspiracy. Like she went through within like 3 minutes, she went through like this whole litany of conspiracy type shit. And I'm just standing there like, because I had done enough of that kind of talking to people. What happens is the people who can't, who are that they're not in, a place where the system will allow them to hear that yet. So what happens is they just end up talking to somebody who already knows all the same shit, right? But then they're so emotional about it, they need to just get it out. But they just end up talking to somebody like me who's like, yeah, I already know all this stuff. Why are you telling me? Like, yeah, I know. Why are you telling me? Basically. And that was my experience was, you know, every once in a while somebody would be kind of interested, but then they would always find a way to undermine whatever I was asserting because they were psychologically incapable of truly considering the ideas being put forth. But then I also found at a certain point, listen to this, freedom grower, if you're still around. I was in the Salvation Army in Austin, Texas, where back when Alex Jones had his InfoWars magazine, and they would just drop big bundles of it off on the streets of Austin. So I'm in the Salvation Army, and we're all flipping through InfoWars magazine, and I'm realizing, oh, like half the dudes in here, they know about as much about this conspiracy stuff as I do, right? So it sort of becomes its own echo chamber at a certain point. And in fact, I got into a back and forth with a bus driver um, in Austin because this is when I was about to get my CDL, and I was thinking, okay, I'm either going to do long haul trucking or I'm going to go to work for City of Austin driving a bus, and I haven't decided which one. So I'm asking her about the mask, right? And oh, this was later on, actually. My apologies. This is after I had some truck driving experience, but I was still thinking about maybe driving a bus. And in fact, this might have been in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now that I think, yes, North Little Rock, Arkansas. My apologies. I'm misremembering. And so she was wearing a mask, and so I made one comment because I think she was kind of trying to imply that why would you even ask about the mask? And so I think I made one comment about the mask, and she launched into an entire explanation of QAnon. She went through the entire QAnon thing again in like 2 minutes. And I'm just looking at her like, I'm like, yeah, I spent 5 minutes looking at QAnon and realized that, okay, this is a bunch of nonsense, but is it interesting on some level? Yeah, it is. Right. And, I spent enough time with it to realize, okay, well, this is, clearly, propaganda, and it's not as it appears to be. And she went and just again normie. So a couple of years later, I got a normie just off the top of her head, just explaining QAnon to me without calling it QAnon. So that's what America's become, folks. So that's an excellent point, Freedom Grower. Excellent point. So let me go back to gandering at the. Oh, I was reading from an article. Yeah. The plan calls for 600 troops to be on standby at all times so they can deploy. So, and I'm assuming there's already versions of this. It's just now it's announced. In as little as 1 hour, the documents say they would be split into two groups of 300 and stationed at military bases in Alabama and Arizona with purview of regions east and west of the Mississippi, meaning both coasts. Because I'm presumed from the perspective of the government, there's going to be less of this going on in the middle part of the country. So it's actually going to be more of a coastal thing, presumably. Um, Cost projections outline who cost is irrelevant, so I'm not even going to read that. The cost doesn't even matter. The article just has to pretend like costs are a concern. It's not. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, I don't see anything. Okay, I don't see nothing in there worth even bothering with. It's just a bunch of nonsense. I mean, it really is. Oh, I do like this. Ralph Nader, Trump's worst crimes and destructions haven't even happened yet. This is a Ralph Nader article, and I've voted 3 times in my life, and the first person I ever voted for president was Ralph Nader, a long ass time ago now, many years ago. Let's try to get through some of this maybe because I saw this yesterday and actually thought about saving it for the stream. Oh, but will the pop-ups let me actually? I don't know that my web browser is going to allow me because they want me to take my boomer finger and click on a tiny X that I'm probably not going to be able to click on. Okay, well, we clicked on the 4 different tiny X's, so maybe we can read it. I don't know. The worst crimes of Donald Trump and dangers to America from the unstable. And I don't necessarily agree with these. These are his characterizations. The worst crimes of Donald Trump and dangers to America from the unstable, monomaniacal, lying outlaw. See, this isn't possible. This you can't have. There's no such thing. This is not possible, Mr. Nader. How do you not know this? This can't happen. So he's going official fiction with it. Lying outlaw in the White House have yet to come. He is not satisfied, and it's this idea that it's the human. It's that it's the human. It's the characteristics of one human being is somehow you know dictating the direction of the country. This is not a possibility, folks. This is a game right here, and it doesn't matter who the president is. It doesn't matter what party. The AI is going to be president at some point. I mean, for real. He is not satisfied with tearing apart our country's social safety net. The country doesn't have a social safety net. Before Trump ever ran for president, the United States did not have a social safety net. So can we call and now I'm getting upset. I'm going to have to end the stream. My apologies. Because if I can't maintain my own personal space, I'm not going to be able to cover this. My apologies. But certainly at the level of my own digestion, I don't have the option of becoming enraged. It's too rough on the body. But probably, again, more stagnated resentments and anger, seeking its outlet, seeking to escape the old energy sphere here. So apologies. We don't have a social safety net. I can't read the article. Can't do it. Now, what is they, though, Freedom Grower? Do you mean the government? And I don't mean like, I don't say who is they to negate what you're asserting. I want to know what you're referring to because I'm curious. Yeah, the system works, right? The system will give us 2 versions of AI to vote for, a red AI and a blue AI. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Two different. Pick a color, any color. Yeah. But I do like the idea that, whatever damage the government's going to do during the Trump's second term, it hasn't even happened yet. Mr. Nader, I believe, is right on the money. We ain't seen nothing yet, folks. Would be my that'd be my view of it. Right. Yeah, the grok or whatever. Yeah. Well, now they're saying that Chat GPT has developed depression or something. I don't know. They meaning the media. See, now I'm not even living up to my own requests of they. The media is talking about Chat GPT potentially having developed depression. But I'm out of here, folks. I got stuff to do. We're at almost 2.5 hours. The data plan's certainly not going to allow for this. But thanks for watching. Bye.